Right now, our recipes post is pretty standard, and just like any other post, I can create content, add tags, and even add a featured image. We can now focus on extending the post type by adding some custom fields for recipes. Every recipe needs the following: ingredients, how long it takes to cook, cooking utensils required, cooking experience, and meal type. Usually, you would create a database table and have it store the data. However, WordPress allows us to use something called the Metadata API. What is metadata? Well, metadata is basically just pieces of information related to a post, page, or user. On its own, it's not very useful. Metadata has to be connected to something. By using the Metadata API, we free ourselves of having to create a table and managing it in the DB. In the resource section, I provide a link to the Metadata API Codex page. As you can see, there are only 4 functions that you can use, but they're very powerful. We actually won't be using these functions, and here's why. Click on the Add Metadata function. WordPress provides a note that says, "This is a generic low-level function and should not be used directly by plugins or themes. Instead, use the corresponding meta functions for the object type you're working with." As WordPress recommends, we shouldn't use these functions. Instead, we're going to use meta functions specifically made for custom post types. Before we can use these functions, we first have to create a meta box. Let's take a look at what a meta box looks like. Try creating a new recipe. On this page, you'll see these boxes that contain different pieces of information about our post. You can minimize them and even drag them around. In the end, they all tie together with the post. All these boxes that can be toggled and dragged around are called meta boxes. You don't have to use a meta box for metadata, but it's awfully convenient to use them anyway. To create a meta box, we first need to hook into when WordPress initializes the admin. Inside the plugin file, we're going to add the admin init hook and call the function recipe admin init. Create an admin folder inside the includes folder. Create an init.php file and then define the function here. Lastly, include this file. We can now use the hook for adding meta boxes. The hook we want to use is called Add Metaboxes, followed by the name of the post type. The options for recipes will only be for the recipe's post type. So, add recipe. This hook will only allow us to add metaboxes to our custom post type. There are a couple of hooks like this that are dynamic. It's always good to read the documentation of the hook to learn more about it. The function we want to call is our create metaboxes. While still in the admin init function, include a file called createmetaboxes.php. Create this file within the admin folder and define the function createmetaboxes. We can now use the add metabox function from within this function. I provide a link to this function inside the resource section of this lecture. There are a number of arguments we can specify. The first is the ID of the metabox. This will be the ID given to the HTML ID attribute. It's pretty useful if you want to add CSS or JavaScript for this metabox. Let's call this function and let's give the ID of our recipe options MB. The second parameter is the title of the metabox. I want to make this translatable and set it to recipe options. The third parameter is the name of the function that will be called when this metabox is displayed. We'll use this function to display input fields and content. I'm going to give it the same name as our ID, which is our recipe options MB. The fourth parameter is the post type. Even though we're calling this function from our post type already, we still need to define the post type this metabox will appear in. In our case, it would be recipe. The fifth parameter is context. This basically asks us where the metabox will appear by default. There are 3 spots available to us, which is normal, advanced, and side. Side will force the metabox to appear on the sidebar here. Normal will make it appear below the content editor, and Advanced will make it appear above. We want to make it appear below the editor, so we'll set this to normal. Next is the priority. Our metabox won't be the only metabox appearing on our post type. So how do we want this metabox to be placed? High above or on the bottom? There are 4 priorities we can set, which are high, core, low, and default. I'm going to use high because this metabox is specifically for recipes, and all the information inside this metabox is completely important and relative. We're almost done. All we have to do is to find the function that will display our fields. Create a new file called recipeoptions.php inside the admin folder. This will contain the metabox function. From the admin init file, I want you to include this file like so. I'm going to output a message from within the new metabox. Try creating a new recipe, and you should now see this sweet little metabox. Just like all the other metaboxes, we can move this around and even toggle it. All that's left is to create the fields and save the data.